The bill that is before this body is being heralded in the press as a bipartisan bill because it's got every Democrat and some Republicans. I think the chances that this bill will do anything meaningful to actually prevent the next mass murder are very low. That's not what this bill is designed to do. This bill is designed, among other things, to satiate the urge to do something. After every one of these, the call comes out, do something. I agree, do something, but do something that works. Do something that will stop these crimes. This bill ain't that. But it does have provisions that are troubling. It does have provisions that satisfy the Democrat political priority to go after the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms of law-abiding citizens. Most troubling in this bill is the funding of so-called red flag laws. Now, these so-called red flag laws have been implemented in multiple states, and they enable the state to take away the right to keep and bear arms from law-abiding citizens. They render you vulnerable. That if you have a disgruntled coworker, if you have an angry ex-boyfriend, an angry ex-girlfriend, they can go and give the state the power to strip you of the right to keep and bear arms. Not if you're a criminal, not if you've committed crimes, not if you've been adjudicated to be a danger to yourself or others. All of those are existing law. Red flag laws lower the threshold and make it easier to take away your right to defend yourself. And in too many of these states, these provisions have little to no protections of due process. The Senate passes this bill, federal dollars will be used to encourage more states to enact laws like this. That means federal tax dollars will be used to implement programs that will strip away Americans' constitutional rights. And mark my words, people will lose their lives over this. That we will see red flag laws that are abused and citizens who are disarmed. And tragically, we're going to see a citizen who's disarmed who is subsequently murdered. Look, the right to keep and bear arms, it's not about hunting. It's not about skeet shooting. Those can be a lot of fun to do, but that is not why it's in the Constitution. The Bill of Rights does not have an amendment devoted to recreational shooting. The reason the Second Amendment is in the Bill of Rights is because you and I and every American have a God-given right to defend our life. There's no right more fundamental than the right to defend your own life and the right to defend your family. The right, if a criminal comes into your house at night seeking to do harm to your children, you and I have a right, I believe, that derives from God Almighty to defend our kids. And whether any individual member of this chamber agrees with that right or not doesn't really matter because it's right there in the Bill of Rights. So the Constitution protects it whether you agree with it or not. And the reason I say these red flag laws, we are going to see people lose their lives over it, is because often when people go and buy a firearm, it's because they're afraid. It's because maybe they've got an angry ex-boyfriend, an angry ex-girlfriend. Maybe they've got a neighbor who they're scared of. Maybe they've got someone threatening them. And we are going to see these laws abused to disarm someone who is subsequently made the victim of a violent crime. And none of the politicians in this chamber who vote for this bill will take any responsibility for the people's lives who will be lost because of it. Mr. President, you might say, well, look, that's all fine and good. But if you don't like this bill, what should we do? Well, so happens I have an answer to that. This week I filed legislation along with Senator John Barrasso from Wyoming, the Cruz-Barrasso legislation builds on what already received a majority vote in this chamber, the Grassley-Cruz legislation of a decade ago. Let me tell you what Cruz-Barrasso does. It focuses on actually stopping this problem. So Cruz-Barrasso funds the Department of Justice to prosecute violent criminals who use firearms. Mr. President, you're from the Commonwealth of Virginia, a wonderful state. As you know well, some of the most important work stopping violent crime and gun crime was pioneered in the Commonwealth of Virginia. During the Bill Clinton presidency, an initiative was started called Project Exile in the Western District of Virginia. The U.S. attorney there laid out a policy that if anyone commits a crime with a firearm, who is illegally possessing that firearm, meaning likely they're a felon in possession, that the feds were going to prosecute them, put them in jail, and they're going to face mandatory minimum crimes. And the U.S. attorney passed out to local prosecutors laminated cards saying, here are all the federal prohibitions on gun possession. They put up ads. They put up billboards in Richmond, Virginia. Richmond tragically had an incredibly high murder rate. They put up billboards. Carry a gun, do hard time. And Project Exile worked phenomenally. The murder rate in Richmond, Virginia plummeted. And we began hearing stories of criminals that would come to knock off a liquor store, criminals that would come to do a home burglary, who would leave their gun at home. They'd say, you know what, look, if I break into this house and I've got a gun with me, I'm doing hard time in federal prison, I think I'll just go there without a gun. It worked. What does Cruz-Barrasso do? It takes Project Exile national. It provides funding for U.S. attorneys to prosecute. If you commit a crime and you got a gun, you're off the streets. You want to stop these crimes? That's a step that will stop these crimes. What else does Cruz-Barrasso do? Creates a gun crime task force at the Department of Justice to prosecute the felons and fugitives year after year after year who try to illegally buy a gun and whom DOJ won't prosecute right now. If Cruz-Barrasso passes, the next Sutherland Springs can be stopped. You know, there are some Democrat officials who say, we don't have time to prosecute people who try to illegally buy guns. I've repeatedly heard testimony from Democrat witnesses in the Judiciary Committee saying that. Let me tell you something right now. If a murderer or if a felon is trying to illegally buy a gun, I don't think that's a paperwork offense. I think they should be prosecuted and put in jail. What else does Cruz-Barrasso do? It provides major funding to make our schools safer. It provides much more funding than the Democrats' bill. All told, $36 billion in this bill. It provides funding, Mr. President, to double the number of police officers in schools across America. To double them. You want to keep kids safe? The single best step you can do is have police officers on campus so that our children have the same protection that members of Congress do, so that our children have the same protection that courthouses do, so that our children have the same protection that banks do. Cruz-Barrasso will double the number of police officers in schools across America. Not only that, let's talk mental health. We all know there is a problem. These deranged shooters over and over again follow similar patterns of being isolated, angry loners with a long pattern of struggling with mental health, often making multiple threats before they carry out a horrific crime. Cruz-Barrasso provides $10 billion in funding for mental health counselors in schools across the country to help identify troubled youth and to stop them before they commit a crime like this. Now, Mr. President, earlier today, there had been discussion that Majority Leader Schumer would schedule a vote on Cruz Barraza. Right now, it appears that may not happen. We're going to vote one way or another. And if I have to exercise the procedural avenues available to me as a senator to force that vote, I am more than happy to do so. But let me tell you actually why we're not seeing the vote so far. Because my amendment is drafted as a substitute. In other words, it would replace the pending bill on the floor. And an awful lot of senators don't want to have to vote on that. Now, I challenge any senator in this chamber to try to make the case that this Democrat bill on the floor would be even half as effective in stopping violent crime, in stopping mass shootings, in stopping criminals from murdering children in school as my legislation would be. The Democrat bill has a fraction of the funding for police officers. It has a fraction of the funding for mental health. The Democrat bill doesn't provide that violent felons who use guns should be prosecuted. The Democrat bill doesn't provide that people who illegally try to buy firearms who are felons and fugitives should be prosecuted. The Democrat bill is not focused on criminals. It's not focused on bad guys. It's focused on the Democrat priority of disarming law-abiding citizens. That's a political priority that too many Senate Democrats value more than keeping kids safe.